modes of transformative practice, be them clinical, be them medical, be them artistic, be them social. So this panel really seeks to demonstrate and bring to the forefront all these different ways of engaging with the arts. So I don't want to take too much time. With that, I would like to introduce Dr. Cathy Malchiodi, who is the director of the Expressive Art Trauma-Informed Practice Institute. So Cathy, we're going to be doing 7 to 10 minutes each, and then we'll be taking questions from the audience. So without further ado, Cathy, please tell us about the role of arts in personal and trauma transformation.
And you will tell me if I go over time, but I've tried to keep this to under 10 minutes. But thank you, Julian, for putting all this together, and I'm just so honored to be able to give this short presentation. And let me do a screen share here while I'm talking so that we get that all taken care of. And I do have the little short films here, so I'm going to try to optimize this. Hold on. There we go. So yeah, I'm an expressive arts therapist. I'm also a psychologist, and it's really an honor to share with everyone a little bit about how the arts, from evidence-based work and also from culture, are making a difference in the recovery around the world with trauma. And this includes our current times and pandemic. And also, if people are following the news, they're well aware that we have a lot of social unrest right now in the United States, but that is reflected around the world. And people are using the arts in this way to be able to address this. So expressive arts therapy is interesting, speaking essentially to Geneva. In Switzerland, actually, there's one of the oldest expressive arts therapy graduate programs and doctoral programs in the world. It's at the European Graduate School. So it's kind of interesting to be talking essentially virtually to Switzerland right now, because that's kind of a ground zero for this practice. Expressive arts therapy essentially is a purposeful use of movement, music, image making, so art making, performance, writing, and play and imagination all mixed together. And really a lot of different sectors. So in healthcare, in psychotherapy and mental health, and just in general wellness practices that communities might engage in. So it's very diverse in terms of where it's practiced, which includes education as well. So we see a lot of this in education. Oops. Trying to get my slide to go forward here. So what the basis of expressive arts therapy is when we think about it with trauma is the fact that neuroscience over the last 10 to 15 years has really taught us that in order to address trauma, talking is not enough. It's just not enough to help people fully recover and repair from what is troubling them, what's distressing their body. So it's really taught us that we need to use the senses. And the arts are all about the senses. They really capitalize on all the senses, which include visual, which include hearing, tactile, all these kinds of things we've found now through evidence are really the starting point for trauma repair and recovery. So even in my mind, even though I'm quite biased because I use this as my main practice, using words alone and just talking with people is often not enough. It's really becoming now well understood that this is a fundamental way to address trauma in individuals and communities, so groups of people. And this is all ages. Sometimes people are thinking already that it has to only do with children. No, it's actually, my work has to do with a lot of adults, mostly in the military right now, who are recovering from post-traumatic stress. But when I say that neuroscience is helping us understand the expressive arts as a practice, we also have to acknowledge another thread here that's evidence, and that's that cultures have regulated themselves throughout time, throughout thousands of years, using these kinds of artistic rituals, conventions, procedures, and ceremonies really to respond directly to trauma and loss. So our evidence is not just in the brain. There are many studies now that point to how these things work through neuroscience and neurobiology. But our main evidence is actually cultural anthropology and ethnology, because humans have always used these practices to return to psychological, physical and social equilibrium. So you can see here in this picture all the art forms and more that I haven't even included on here. But when we look to that, we have the real evidence actually that these practices are what we need in order to resolve trauma. Another piece that I've been looking at, and this is just my personal research, is thinking about how these practices fall into different categories. Because we do have visual art, we have music, we have drama, we have dance, but all these things fall actually and overlap sometimes into some really universal healing practices throughout time. And I've broken these down, and this is what I want to share with you for the rest of this short presentation, that they fall into movement practices, practices that involve sound, practices that involve storytelling, and practices that involve silence, which are more contemplative, regulating, and meditative. So that's what I really have been looking at and how these practices are helping people to recover. So I'm just going to take you quickly here through these 4 practices with a little bit of example. Some of the examples very contemporary right now. But when we look at movement, we think of dancing. Dancing certainly is a core practice in movement that has been helpful for people to resolve and repair trauma. We also have practices like yoga. And yoga, of course, has been around for thousands of years. Cross cultures, we have energy arts, Tai Chi, Qigong, Aikido. We can look also at cultural practices such as the hula, sun dance, which is a practice in the US among our indigenous populations, corroboree, which is in Australia. So these are really experiences that involve self-soothing repetition, familiarity. They connect people to each other. And I just want to see if I can share a short film here. This is very recent, and if a lot of you are familiar, we've had a lot of unrest right now in the US due to the death of a man named George Floyd in some incident of police brutality. But around the world, this has triggered people to get together and essentially advocate, but they're advocating through their own cultural practices in order to honor this individual and also to be active in protesting what is happening. So this is the Maori and in New Zealand, this is a response to the death of George Floyd and the racial protests in the US. I think this is remarkable because this is what's happening throughout the world. People are using globally to express solidarity, but also do it for their own healing, their own social and physical equilibrium. So that's just one short example there, but if you went on the internet and looked up some of the things that are going on in terms of protests and advocacy, we're seeing lots of different art forms being used to come out into the world and express what is going on and what people are feeling and sensing. So, research-wise, we know that common art experiences like music and drumming and singing, chanting are all very effective in trauma repair and recovery. So the neuroscience proves this, but the cultural existence of it for thousands of years, I think, is the real evidence that we still use these practices. So sound is an interesting one because music actually is the only art form that uses the entire brain and activates the entire brain. And we probably know the most about music as a remedy for trauma because it can lift you out of depression. Also, if you are depressed, it enlivens you. It also brings back memories. It's also a powerful pain reducer. So if we think about sound, we can think about singing, drumming, playing instruments.
We've got about 1 minute, Cathy, just giving you a heads up.
Wow, that went by fast. So we have here a little bit of what happened in Notre Dame, in the burning Notre Dame. So people get together to do these practices. I'm going to move on here then, because I do want to share this one, which is storytelling, which you can see here. This is the cover of a magazine in the US that's just going to come out next week. Artist Kadir Nelson for the New Yorker. And imagery has always been a popular and powerful way to tell stories. It stimulates and enhances memory. it also helps people talk more about what happened. We know that now, that if we do a simple drawing, we're liable to tell 2 to 3 times more language than talking alone. So silence, I'm not going to go into because we don't have time, but the expressive arts are a natural relaxant. That's the thing we know from neuroscience. But again, these things have existed over time. And just one last thing, because this is very important. When people are looking for a trauma remedy or something to help repair, the biggest evidence has come from the people themselves. When given a choice of treatments, talk, all kinds of things, patients repeatedly choose forms of self-expression because they cite improvement in their own quality of life and well-being. So I think that's probably the most powerful evidence of all, that people return to it. So thank you.